The strap snaps on a Thursday. Ayana doesn't gasp, doesn't curse out loud. She catches the backpack mid-fall, presses it against her chest, and stands very still for exactly 2 seconds. The gutter is 6 inches from where it nearly landed. Inside, her scissor case, barber kit, the notebook where she's been tracking every dollar toward her own barbershop, and the spare hoodie she carries because she learned years ago that cold nights don't send warnings. She's been at the stop for 16 minutes. The bus is late. The kind of late that, in the language of people who take public transit every day, translates to, the city still has something left to take from you tonight. Across the stop, not beside her, but present in that specific way a person can be present without trying, Arden leans his equipment case against the brick wall. No phone. No headphones. Just quiet. The way a man who spent 8 hours surrounded by sound doesn't need to produce any more of it. She knows the case, the dark jacket, the way he stands with his shoulders carrying something that has nothing to do with equipment. They've shared this stop for weeks, never exchanged names, but there's a recognition that doesn't need language, built out of same time, same corner, same silence, same city wearing them both down at the same rate. He moves before he thinks. No running. No ceremony. He kneels beside her, pulls the roll of gaffer tape from his jacket pocket, the way someone else might pull out gum, and says quietly, "I can fix this. It's quick." She looks at him for a beat. Not suspicion, evaluation. In tenths of a second, she reads his hands, already worked today. His posture, nothing to prove. His voice, a notice, not a question. What she doesn't find, performance. What she does find, attention that wasn't requested. She hands him the backpack without a word. He works fast and clean, wraps the strap, reinforces the breaking point, finishes it without excess. Then he takes a small strip of reflective tape, the kind used to mark stage cables, and presses it smooth near the zipper, deliberate and even. Why the reflective tape? He doesn't look up yet. Makes you visible from a distance at night. You're here every day at this time. It isn't a line. It isn't protection being offered like a gift that expects something back. It's utility with precision. Care that doesn't announce itself. The bus arrives. They board. They sit in different rows. Him 1 seat ahead, her 1 behind. The city window moves the same for both. The backpack is fixed. Everything else is still open. If you've ever had someone do something small for you that landed heavier than it had any right to, you already know where this is going. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of this story, and help us keep writing the kind of love that doesn't announce itself. She didn't sleep well. The honest version. She lay in bed for 2 hours staring at the ceiling with her backpack sitting on the chair across the room, the strip of reflective tape near the zipper catching the light from the street. She could see it from the bed. She'd started to leave it there on purpose, which was the part she didn't want to examine too closely. The version she gave Deja the next morning at the barber shop was, "I'm fine. Just tired." Deja has known Ayana for 4 years. She tied her first color braid in the same barber shop when they were both new to the neighborhood and both deeply unimpressed by everything except the work. She knows that "just tired" is the phrase Ayana uses when something real happened and she hasn't decided what to do with it yet. "You're moving slow," Deja said, watching Ayana set up her station. "I move exactly as fast as I need to." "Mm-hmm." Deja went back to her own station, which meant nothing was over. Mr. Mario arrived at 9:30, same as always. He sat with the same dignified posture he'd held for 3 years of haircuts, and Ayana wrapped the cape around his shoulders and picked up her comb, and for 20 minutes, everything was quiet in the good way, the way where the work takes over and the brain gets to rest. "You look like someone who slept on a thought," Mr. Mario said midway through. She kept her eyes on the fade line. "I'm good. Didn't say you weren't." He was quiet a moment. "Just that you look like you're somewhere else while being here." She didn't answer. He didn't push. That was the thing about him. He planted a sentence and left it there for you to water or not. 3 years of appointments had taught her that he understood the weight of his own words, and so he chose them sparingly. It was a form of respect she hadn't encountered much, and she never took it for granted. By noon, she'd taken 4 clients. By 2 in the afternoon, she found herself thinking about the tape again. Not the gesture in a soft, romantic way, but practically. Thinking about the specific kind of knowledge it took to carry reflective tape on your person, which meant he worked somewhere that required it, which meant he was not a man who talked about his work, because you didn't carry work tools unless the work was something you lived in. She understood that. She was the same. "Penny for your thoughts," Deja said from across the room. "I'm thinking about the chair cushions. We need new ones." "That is definitely not what you're thinking about." Deja smiled without turning around. "But, okay." The afternoon passed slowly. The barbershop had that end-of-week tiredness in it. Clients a little quieter, conversations shorter, everyone just trying to get to Friday. Ayana swept her station twice. She was precise about her station in a way that had nothing to do with neatness and everything to do with control. The things she could keep in order. At 6:15, she changed her hoodie in the back, shouldered the backpack, and said goodbye to Deja. "Stay warm," Deja said, which she always said. "Always do," Ayana said, which she always replied. She stopped at the cafe 2 doors down. It was already closing, the chairs upside down on half the tables, the barista wiping the counter with the expression of someone who has 90 seconds left of patience. Ayana ordered a drip coffee, simple, no modifications. The barista handed it over in a paper cup and waived the cost. "We'd throw it out anyway," she said. Ayana took the cup and kept walking. She told herself it was nothing, that she had the coffee in her hand because she was cold and it was convenient. She didn't fully convince herself, but she tried. He was at the stop when she arrived. Same wall, same lean, the equipment case at his feet. He looked at her the way he always looked at her at this stop, not watching, not performing disinterest, just present. She stopped beside him. Not across. Beside. She held out the coffee. "Left over," she said. "From the shop. Figured you'd want it." He looked at the cup, looked at her. Something very quiet moved across his face. Not surprise exactly. More like recognition of something he'd been expecting without knowing he'd been expecting it. He took the cup. "Thanks." They stood side by side for the next 11 minutes waiting for the bus. Neither spoke. But the silence was different now. It had a direction to it. A weight that wasn't uncomfortable. She got home, set the backpack down, and sat on the edge of her bed. She didn't know his name. That was the part that landed strangely. Weeks of the same stop, the fixed strap, the reflective tape she'd been seeing from her bed for 24 hours, the coffee she'd just handed him, and she didn't know his name. He didn't know hers. She lay back and looked at the ceiling. She wanted to know. His name came up through the workplace the way information always did in the world he inhabited. Sideways and accidentally. Tomas mentioned it first, on a set-up afternoon at the venue when Arden came back from a supply run with 2 coffees and set one on the soundboard without asking. "You know," Tomas said, taking the cup, "if you did that for a woman, she would think you were in love with her." Arden ran a cable along the floor and taped it down. "It's coffee. That's exactly what someone in love says." He didn't respond to that. Tomas found silence extremely frustrating, which was why he talked enough for both of them, and it had been a functional arrangement for 3 years of working the same venues together. In 3 years, they had not once had a disagreement about the work. They had had exactly 2 arguments about anything else, both resolved within the hour. It was, by Arden's standards, the most uncomplicated relationship in his life, which was, by Arden's standards, high praise. "The woman at the bus stop," Tomas said later, when they were testing levels. "You went back last night, and the night before. I take the same bus home." "Right." Tomas adjusted a mic stand. "And you never took a different route even when it saves 40 minutes. Arden didn't answer. The levels came back clean and he marked it in his notebook. That evening, he arrived at the stop at his usual time. She was already there, backpack strap intact, still holding from the tape, which meant the tape was good. He noted this without noting it. She had her phone out but wasn't really looking at it, and when he set down his case, she lowered the phone, and they were in the sideways version of greeting that they'd built over weeks. A slight adjustment of posture that meant, "I see you," without announcing it. The bus was 9 minutes late. 2 nights ago, he said, which was not a sentence that went anywhere obvious. But she understood it as, "I noticed you brought coffee." And she responded accordingly. "You were here late. I figured you hadn't eaten." "I had." "Okay." A pause. A bus that wasn't theirs went by without stopping. "The tape's holding," he said. She glanced at the strap. "It is. It'll hold longer if you don't overload it. I know how to take care of my things." "I know you do." Quiet. "I'm saying the tape has limits." She looked at him then. The sideways kind of look. The one that says, "I'm not sure if we're still talking about the backpack." He was studying the street with his usual calm expression, and she decided they were still talking about the backpack. The bus arrived. They got on. This time they sat in the same row, not next to each other, but close enough that the distance was a choice rather than a default. She looked out the window. He looked at the floor. The city ran past in amber and neon. At her stop, she stood, and he didn't move, which meant they didn't get off at the same place, which was information she found herself filing away like a measurement. "Same time tomorrow," she said. Not a question. He looked up. "Same time." She got off. The bus pulled away. She walked the 4 blocks to her building and took the stairs because the elevator was slow, and on the 3rd floor landing she stopped and stood very still for a second. She still didn't know his name, but she knew he took a different bus home. She knew he worked with equipment. She knew he carried tape like a second skin. She knew that when she handed him something, he took it without making it a moment, without reducing it to a gesture or expanding it into something she'd have to respond to. She knew that she had said "same time tomorrow," and meant it. She knew he had said "same time" back, and there was no performance in it. In her barbershop notebook, the one where she tracked the savings, there was a page in the back she used for miscellaneous notes. She opened it to that page and wrote nothing. She just held the pen over it for a second. Then she closed the notebook and went to bed. It happened on a Tuesday, which felt too ordinary for something that had been building for weeks. Ayana was at the stop first. This was the arrangement that had no official name. She arrived, he arrived, they stood. But that night she was earlier than usual because a client had canceled, and she'd left the barbershop before Deja could ask her anything. He arrived 3 minutes after her, set down his case, stood beside her. "I'm Ayana," she said. She said it the way she handed him coffee, without preamble, without making it an event. Because it had become absurd to not know, and Ayana Brooks was not a woman who carried absurdity patiently. He looked at her. Something moved in his face. "Arden," he said. She nodded once. He nodded once. The bus was 6 minutes away, and they both looked at the street. "How long have you been at this stop?" he asked. First question either of them had asked about the other's daily life. 2 years, since I started at the barbershop." "Which one?" "Carter's, on Delmont." He was quiet for a moment. "I know that block. There's a record shop on the corner." "Still there." "The owner is 70 and refuses to leave." A small pull at the corner of his mouth. Not a full smile. More like his face acknowledging that something was worth acknowledging. "You're a barber." "I am." She adjusted the backpack strap. "You work venue tech." "Sound." "I'm at the Hollow mostly." The Hollow. She knew it. The music venue on 5th that had been running since the 90s. The kind of place that smelled like old wood and amplifiers, and was genuinely indifferent to trends. Good shows, reliable lineup, the kind of institution that a certain type of person in this city organized their life around. "I've been there," she said. "Was the sound good?" She thought about it. Yeah, actually, yes. Good. He said it flatly, but she registered it. That was pride. Quiet, contained, but real. The bus came. They got on. This time they sat next to each other. It happened the way these things happen when the bus is crowded, and there are only 2 seats together, and you don't manufacture drama out of logistics. She sat by the window. He sat on the aisle. Their arms were close enough that she was aware of it. Ayana, he said, after a while. Not calling her. Just using the name. Like he was placing it somewhere. She didn't respond, but she heard it. At the barber shop the next morning, Deja was already in, finishing a braid on a regular client when Ayana walked in. Deja looked up, read her face the way she always did, like a book Ayana kept forgetting to hide. You know his name, Deja said. Ayana set down her bag. I know a lot of people's names. Mm-hmm. Deja tied off the braid. What's his? Ayana unpacked her kit, put the combs in line, adjusted the mirror. Didn't answer for 40 seconds, which was 40 seconds more than she needed to not answer if she genuinely didn't care. Arden, she said finally. Deja said nothing, just smiled at the braid she was finishing like she'd been told everything she needed. It's just a name, Ayana said. Of course it is, Deja said. Mr. Mario arrived at 9:30. He sat down and she wrapped the cape and picked up her tools and the morning moved forward. But at one point, midway through the trim, Mr. Mario looked at her in the mirror with the measured expression of someone who chose their words like he chose his clothes, for fit and occasion. Have you ever let anyone see you really work? He asked. She met his eyes in the mirror. It was a strange question at a strange time. You watch me work every time you're in this chair. I know, he said. That's not what I meant. He said nothing else. She didn't ask him to clarify. But that night at the bus stop, when Arden arrived and set his case down and looked at her with that steady attention, she felt the question follow her there. She thought, he carries tape like a second skin because the work is everything, same as you. The bus came. He let her board first. She didn't make anything of it, but she remembered it the whole way home. Satur. The rain started at 5:15, and it wasn't the polite kind. By the time Ayana reached the stop at 6:40, her hood was up, and her sneakers were already past saving. The stop had a half shelter, the kind that protects you from above but ignores wind entirely. And 3 other people were already huddled under it. She found the edge of it, and stood, watching the street run. Arden arrived 6 minutes later, rain-darkened jacket, and that particular expression of someone who is wet and has decided there is nothing to be done about being wet. He stood beside her without comment. No mention of the rain, just present. The bus tracker said 22 minutes. Bad show tonight? She asked, because he was tighter than usual, not tense, but compressed. Amp died in the middle of the second set, had to patch it live. Could you tell from the room? No one noticed. So it went well. He looked at her. She kept her eyes on the street. Yeah, he said. It went well. A pause. There was a client today who sat down and said they wanted a haircut that would change their life. She turned. How did you know about that? He blinked. I didn't. I was asking. A second. And then she laughed. Not a polished laugh, not a social laugh, but the kind that arrives before you can decide if it should. He didn't laugh, but his face opened up in a way she'd never seen from across the stop, and she realized that she'd been watching him from too far away to catch that expression. He actually said that, she said. He sat down and he said, I want a haircut that changes my life. And I thought about it for a second. And I gave him the best fade I've done in a month. She shook her head. Charged him the regular price. He tipped $40. Arden was quiet for a moment. Did it change his life? He walked out looking like he believed it might. Which is about as close as I can get. The rain shifted direction. Someone under the shelter swore and adjusted their umbrella. Ayana and Arden were already at the edge, already getting wet on one side, and neither of them moved further in. He told her about the first show he'd ever wired alone, age 22, at a venue in Columbus that no longer existed. How the stage monitor had a ground loop hum, and he'd spent 45 minutes tracing it before finding a cable someone had stepped on 6 months prior and never reported. How when the show ran clean, the band had no idea. How the lead singer had been mid-set, hitting exactly the note that required all 400 watts of low-end support, and Arden had been standing at the board watching the levels move and thinking, this is what it's supposed to sound like. Not pride in front of an audience, just the private satisfaction of something working the way it was built to. How he'd packed up his kit and taken the late bus home and felt for the first time like he knew exactly what he was supposed to do with his hands. She told him about the first time she cut someone's hair outside a school setting, a woman who sat in her kitchen chair and handed her a pair of shears and said, "Just clean it up." How she'd been so careful her hands shook. How the woman looked in the mirror and said simply, "There she is." How she'd gone home and sat outside her building for an hour because she didn't know what to do with that feeling. The bus arrived. It was crowded and loud and entirely indifferent to the fact that they'd just given each other something real. They got on. That night, Ayana pushed open her apartment door, set the backpack on the table, and stood in the kitchen for a moment. Her shoes were soaked. Her hood had done nothing. She was cold. But the cold was ordinary. The rest of it was not. From the other room, her phone buzzed. A message from Deja. "You came home smiling." Ayana typed back, "I live alone. You can't know that." Deja replied, "I know because you're texting me at 9 p.m. and you never text unless something good happened or something bad happened, and you don't type like something bad happened." Ayana put the phone down. She did not confirm it, but she didn't deny it either. The client was in the chair for 40 minutes and spent 30 of them testing limits. It started with a comment about price, then about the time it was taking. Then, when Ayana didn't react to either, about how things were done at other places, said in a tone that was very specifically designed to land somewhere between criticism and insult. He wasn't loud. He never raised his voice. He was the kind of person who understood that quiet dismissal cuts deeper than a scene. Ayana finished the fade. It was one of the cleaner ones she'd done that week. She handed him the mirror without a word. He looked at himself for a long moment. The way people do when they're deciding if they have a right to complain about work they can't actually fault. He paid. He left. He didn't tip. Deja watched him go from across the room. She waited until the door closed. "You all right?" "I'm fine." Ayana cleaned the station. "I did my job." "You did more than your job. You did his job and your job and did it cleanly." "That's what I do." "Ayana." "I'm fine, Deja." She said it without heat, which was the version that was hardest to argue with. The afternoon moved on. Mr. Mario had left earlier in the day after his appointment and had pressed her shoulder once on the way out, a gesture he'd made before, and that she received the same way each time, as something that weighed enough to mean something. She left the shop at 7. The neighborhood was that particular shade of urban evening. Streetlights on early because of cloud cover, the sound of traffic bouncing off buildings, the kind of ambient noise that was so constant you only noticed it when it stopped. Arden was already at the stop. He looked at her once. That was all it took. One reading of her posture, her pace, the particular flatness she wore when she'd closed the door on something she didn't want to let out. He didn't ask. He just stood next to her. Shoulder to shoulder, almost. Not touching. Just there. The bus was 11 minutes out, and neither of them said anything for 4 of those minutes. The city ran its noise around them, and Ayana stood in it with her arms crossed and felt the weight of the day pressing down the back of her neck. Then she said, "He came in and sat like the chair was already beneath him." Arden didn't respond. Just listening. I gave him a clean fade. Cleaner than he deserved. She exhaled. He left without tipping. "Which I don't care about. I care about the way he looked at me the whole time, like my skill was a formality he had to get through. Quiet. You did your job, Arden said. Low, plain. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. It was such a simple thing to say. She'd said variations of it to herself in the mirror before. She'd heard it from Deja in kinder packaging. But from him, in that tone, with no attempt to soften it or make it a comfort. It landed like something true. She turned her face slightly away. The streetlight was on her left, and she let it take the moment. It gets to me, she said, quieter. I hate that it gets to me. Things that are worth doing get to you. He was looking at the street. If it didn't, you'd have stopped caring, and then you'd be bad at it. She stood with that. The bus arrived. They got on. They sat in the same row again. Same arrangement. Her at the window. Him on the aisle. They rode in silence that wasn't uncomfortable. The kind of silence that meant something had been said and didn't need repeating. She got off at her stop. He didn't. She walked her 4 blocks. On the second one, in the middle of the sidewalk, she stopped and admitted cleanly and without drama that she hadn't wanted the bus to come. Not because of him exactly. Or not only. But because the stop, in these last weeks, had become the one part of her day that belonged only to her, and also, increasingly, to someone else, in a way that didn't crowd her, in a way that made the end of the day feel like something other than just the end of the day. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer than she needed to. Then she kept walking. Tomas brought it up on a Tuesday setup. "You've been taking the long way home," he said, while they were wrapping cable on the stage at the Hollow. Arden ran the tape line. "The route changed." "The route hasn't changed. You just don't take the shortcut anymore. The shortcut is slower at rush hour." Tomas stopped rapping. Looked at him with the specific expression of a man who talks too much and therefore develops excellent pattern recognition. "There's a woman at the bus stop." Arden kept working. "I'm not asking," Tomas said. "I'm stating." "Then why do you need a response?" "Because I've known you for 3 years, and I've never seen you take a detour for anything except a better cable route." Tomas finished the rap. "So I'm stating, because if I ask, you'll just stare at me, and at least this way you have to listen." That Thursday, the night shifted. Ayana arrived at the stop at her normal time, and for 20 minutes the stop was just the stop. Other people coming and going, the light from the convenience store across the street, the usual ambient pressure of the end of the day. At minute 21, she checked the bus tracker. The bus had passed, not canceled, not delayed. It had come and she'd been distracted by something on her phone and missed it. The next one was 18 minutes out. She looked up from her phone and realized Arden was already there, leaning against the wall, watching her with that level look. "You missed it," he said. "I know." He said nothing else. He settled back against the wall with the patience of someone for whom waiting is not a burden. The night was clear for once, dry, slightly cold, the sky that shade of deep urban blue between full dark and the sodium lights. They stood there for the 18 minutes, and somehow, somewhere inside the 3rd or 4th minute, the conversation found them. He told her about the year he'd been invisible at a job. Not mistreated, just overlooked. The way you can be reliable and present and do everything correctly and still get passed over for someone louder, not better. The way he'd learned to stop expecting acknowledgement and just build things that proved themselves. She told him about the year she'd extended trust she shouldn't have. Not a single dramatic story, a series of smaller ones. A manager who took credit. A situation on a night bus that had required her to make decisions quickly. A friendship that had taught her the difference between someone who needs you and someone who wants to be near you. How, after all of it, she'd built an interior perimeter that she hadn't consciously designed and couldn't fully see from the inside. He was quiet for a moment after she said that. Then, "Do you think you'd know if someone was past the perimeter?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "I think I'd realize it after the fact." He nodded. Like that was the right answer, not the comfortable one. The bus came. Neither of them moved. The door opened. 2 people got on. The driver looked at them with a neutral expression. Neither Ayana nor Arden moved toward the doors. The bus left. They stood at the stop for another 40 minutes talking. About the barber shop she was saving for. She told him more than she meant to, because he asked one specific question that unlocked more than she intended. What's the name going to be? She hadn't told anyone that. Not Deja. She told him, and heard herself saying the name out loud for the first time, and it sounded real in the air between them. He told her about the studio he wanted, not a full production space, just a room with good acoustics and a decent board, and the ability to mix at midnight without apologizing to anyone. He'd been thinking about it for 2 years, calculating square footage against rent against the work schedule, the way you think about something that's real but not yet ready. She listened the way she listened to clients, not waiting for her turn to talk, but actually tracking what he said, the details he chose, the ones he left out. Where? She asked. Somewhere I don't have to explain the noise to neighbors. Good answer. They took the next bus, sat in the usual row. Didn't talk much after, not because anything was wrong, but because everything that needed saying had already been said. She got home at 10:20. She opened the barbershop notebook and turned to the miscellaneous page in the back. She wrote a name, his name, not in a romantic way. Just because things you say out loud for the first time deserve a record somewhere. Then she closed the notebook and slept well for the first time in days. She missed the bus, but she gained something that doesn't have a name yet. And you know exactly what it was. If you're already rooting for them, subscribe and stay with this story until the end. Nah, he wasn't there on Monday. She noticed it the way she noticed when a piece of furniture had been moved in a room she knew well. A slight wrongness, a recalibration. The stop was the same size. The brick wall was the same. The gap where his equipment case usually rested against the wall was just a section of sidewalk. She took the bus home alone. On Tuesday, she arrived at the usual time and stood there for 6 minutes past her bus departure without moving, which meant she missed the bus. Then she took the next one and arrived home later than usual and told herself nothing. On Wednesday, she did not stay past the first bus. She got on and sat down and kept her eyes on her phone the entire ride. On Thursday, Deja caught her re-cleaning a station that was already clean. 3 days, Deja said. Ayana adjusted the comb tray. What? You've been off for 3 days. You've reorganized your station twice, and the other day you sat in the back room for 10 minutes during your break, just sitting. I was resting. You don't rest sitting up. Deja leaned on the counter. Where is he? Ayana turned around. Where is who? It wasn't a question. Deja knew it wasn't a question. She just held the silence with the calm of a woman who was not going to be redirected. He's not at the stop, Ayana said finally. It's been a few days. He probably has a different schedule. Or you could text him. I don't have his number. A beat. Right, Deja said. It's not what you're implying. We just never... Ayana. Deja's voice was gentle but direct. You missed your bus for 2 days standing in the cold. That's information. I'm not judging you. I'm literally never going to judge you for this. I'm just telling you what I'm seeing so you don't have to wonder. Ayana stood in the middle of her station, with her hands at her sides, and said nothing for a moment. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this, she said. We have no agreement. No, nothing. He's someone I talk to at a bus stop. I have no right to wonder where he is. The word right is interesting there, Deja said, not pressing, just leaving it. Ayana went back to cleaning her station. The comb tray was already clean. She cleaned it anyway. The thing she couldn't say, not to Deja, not even in the notebook, was that the absence had clarified something she'd been managing not to see. She had spent weeks telling herself the stop was a convenience, the conversations a natural byproduct of proximity, the flashlight on her keychain just a practical object from a practical person. She was good at this kind of accounting. She had a talent for reducing things to their components and refusing to look at what they added up to. But 3 evenings at an empty stop had a way of making the math harder to avoid. She had built her independence in specific, deliberate layers, not out of pride, but out of necessity. She had looked at the cost of needing people and decided that self-sufficiency was more durable. It had served her well. She just hadn't accounted for what it felt like when someone appeared without being asked, without a contract, without a performance, without taking up space she hadn't offered. She hadn't budgeted for that kind of presence. She had no protocol for what to do when something you hadn't planned on became something you noticed missing. Mr. Mario came in at 4, his regular afternoon slot. He sat and she worked, and the barbershop moved around them the way it always did. When she was finishing his trim, he looked at her in the mirror with that unhurried attention. "Sometimes the people who show up consistently," he said, "are so consistent that we forget to check if we'd missed them. Until they don't show up." She met his eyes in the mirror. "You missed 1 appointment in 3 years," she said. "The flu. And when I came back, you didn't say a word. But I saw you exhale." He let a moment pass. "You didn't even know you'd been holding your breath." She finished the trim. He paid and left. She stood at her station and thought about the reflective tape near the zipper of her backpack, which she could see from the hook on the wall, and thought about how it had been there for weeks now, and she had never once thought about removing it. On Friday, she arrived at the stop at the regular time, 6:40, and stood under the half-shelter. He wasn't there. She took the bus home. She got off at her stop and walked her 4 blocks, and on the 3rd one she stopped and admitted, cleanly and without drama, that she had been waiting longer than the bus. He was at the stop on Saturday. She almost walked past it. She was running an errand, not her usual route home, and the stop was a block east of her path, which meant she had specifically adjusted her path without fully accounting for why she was adjusting it. He was there. Jacket darker with evening, case at his feet, the same lean. He looked up when she appeared, and something in his face settled. Not relief, something quieter. More like, right. She stopped in front of him. They looked at each other for a moment. "Work," he said. "I know. 2 full days set up plus the show itself. We weren't back until 4 in the morning yesterday." "I know," she said, which was partly a lie. She hadn't known the details, but she understood it. She recognized the shape of work that consumed you, that didn't have a clock and required everything. She didn't need the timeline. She needed the fact. She had told herself she would be normal, that whatever 3 days of absence had built up in her, she would set it down and be the person she'd been before. Steady, unattached to outcomes, professional in her own emotional life. So when she said, "I know," she meant it as a closing of the subject, a return to the standing arrangement. He reached into his jacket pocket. What he pulled out was small, a keychain flashlight, the kind that cost $6 at any hardware store, but this specific one had a warm LED bulb, soft yellow light rather than the harsh white of utility flashlights. He held it out to her. "Saw this," he said. "Thought about the walk from the stop to your building." She looked at the flashlight in his hand. 4 blocks at night, along a street with inconsistent lighting. She'd made that walk hundreds of times. She'd never thought twice about it. But someone who installed stage lighting for a living would notice automatically where the light failed. He remembered the reflective tape. She understood what that meant. She took the flashlight, turned it on briefly, warm, clean, exactly right for a street walk. 4 blocks, she said. "I know," he said. And there was something in that, the mirroring of her own earlier words, that she couldn't fully address in the moment. She put the flashlight on her keychain, next to the barbershop key and the apartment key, and the small weight of it was practical and deliberate, and said the things that neither of them had found the words for yet. Later, across town, Thomas was loading cable into a van outside the Hollow when his phone buzzed. He looked at it. A message from the venue manager about next season's contract. He thought about it for a moment, then put his phone away. He thought about what he'd noticed over the past several weeks. The small calibrations in Arden's timing. The way he moved differently since the start of this, less compressed. As if some chronic invisible tension had been quietly resolved without ceremony. Tomas had been in the events business long enough to know that the people who worked it fell into two categories. The ones who use the work to avoid their lives, and the ones who use their lives to make the work mean something. He had always known which category Arden was in. He just hadn't known, until recently, what the second half of that equation looked like for him. He thought about the morning shows, the money, the slots, the way Arden had turned them down without drama or explanation. And he thought about a woman he'd never met who apparently had a backpack with reflective tape on it and 4 city blocks between her bus stop and her front door. He sent one message to Arden. 2 morning shows last month. You turned them down. I'm covering for you, but you owe me coffee and honesty. Arden read it at the bus stop, standing next to Ayana. He put the phone away. Something wrong? She asked. No, he said. And it was true. The bus came. They got on. The warm LED of the flashlight on her keychain caught the overhead light for a second as she adjusted her bag, and he saw it, and looked at the window. Tomas kept his word about the coffee. 2 mornings later, on a slow Tuesday with nothing scheduled until afternoon, he showed up at the Hollow, while Arden was running a diagnostic on the main board, set 2 cups on the console, and said, "Talk." Arden ran the diagnostic. "I covered for you twice," Tomas said. "Morning slots, both decent money. You didn't say why, you just said no. I did it because I would do anything for you, and you know that. But I'm asking." A long pause. "The morning slots would have meant staying over," Arden said. "Coming back on a different schedule." "Right." Tomas took his coffee. "Different schedule as in, not making the bus." Silence. "Not making the bus," Tomas confirmed, answering himself. He looked at the board. "Arden, you passed on real money to make a bus." "I know. I'm not saying you were wrong. I'm saying you need to know what you're doing." Arden was quiet for a moment, eyes on the levels in front of him. "I know what I'm doing." "Does she?" That was the one that landed. He didn't answer. Not because he was avoiding it. Because the honest answer was, no. Not fully. He had given her the flashlight. He had fixed the strap. He had stood next to her through a bad day and said the thing that needed saying. He had been present with the total consistency he knew how to offer. But he had never said out loud, in plain language, what any of it meant. Because he had learned, through years of being overlooked in exactly the way he didn't want to repeat, that talking about something before it was solid felt like inviting it to disappear. He also understood, sitting with that logic now, that there was a version of it that was cowardice dressed as patience. He had spent years being the most reliable person in every room he was in. Reliable to the work, to the equipment, to the schedule. He had never been unreliable. But reliability, he was starting to understand, was not the same as presence. You could show up every day and still be absent from the things that mattered. You could communicate everything through what you did and still leave the other person with nothing concrete to hold. He had not been absent, but he had not been legible either. And that was its own kind of withholding. That evening, Ayana arrived at the stop in a different gear. Not heavy, lighter actually, in the specific way of someone who had made a decision somewhere in the afternoon. At the barbershop earlier, she had written something new in the notebook's miscellaneous page. Next to his name, which had been there since the night they missed the bus, she'd added one line. Not a declaration. Just information she was letting herself acknowledge on paper before she tried it out loud. They stood at the stop. The evening was cold and still. "Tomas told you," Arden said. She turned. "He didn't. But now I know there's something to know." He exhaled slowly. "The morning slots. I turned down 2 because the timing wouldn't have worked. I would have missed. This." Silence. "This," she repeated. The stop. "You." Flat, clear, without decoration. I didn't make a project out of it. I just knew that I didn't want to be somewhere else. She stood with it. You could have said something, she said. I know. He met her eyes. I'm saying it now. The street ran its usual noise around them. A car passed. The convenience store light blinked once. I do the same thing, she said. I do it in reverse. I don't ask. I don't say. I decide what things mean by what people do, and I never tell them what I've decided. Is that what you did with the keychain? She looked down at her keys, where the flashlight sat. Yes. And what did you decide? She looked at him. Not the sideways look, not the evaluation read, the direct one, the kind she rarely turned on anyone. That you were paying attention to things no one asked you to pay attention to, she said, and that it meant something you weren't going to say unless you had to. He nodded slowly. You were right. Something settled between them. Not a resolution, but an agreement. The terms were still being written, but both of them knew the shape of it now. The bus came, and for once they just got on, together, without any of the weight of the previous weeks. The storm came on a Friday. The kind of storm the city hadn't had since March. Not violent, but wide and serious. The rain coming sideways under the half-shelter and turning the street into moving water. The stop was crowded. 4 people plus them. Everyone pressed as far under the shelter as the geometry allowed. Arden positioned himself at the outward edge. Not dramatically, not with announcement. Just, he was between her and the worst of the wind, the way someone adjusts a microphone stand, functional and precise. She noticed. She didn't scan the street the way she usually did at crowded stops. She didn't do the inventory she'd run automatically for years, reading her surroundings, mapping the people, calculating exits. She just stood in the space he'd made, and was still in a way that felt unfamiliar, and then, after a moment, felt right. 2 days earlier, the venue manager had sat Arden down, the permanent technician position, what he'd been building toward for 2 years. Not a freelance gig, not a per-show contract, but a salaried role at the Hollow, equipment responsibility, consistent schedule, benefits, stability in the exact shape he'd been working toward. It started in 3 weeks. The shift, afternoon through close. He would be there when the shows loaded in, and not leave until the last cable was packed. The bus stop time was 7:45 in the evening. He had done the math. 3 weeks until his daily schedule ceased to intersect with hers at this corner. He had not told her yet, because he was still deciding what exactly he wanted to say. At the stop, in the rain, she turned to him. You're quiet, she said. I have news. She looked at him. He told her about the position, described it plainly, what it was, what it meant, what it changed. He watched her face as he said the part about the shift change, the new timing, the way the schedule moved everything. Her expression did very little. This was not surprise. She was good at receiving information before deciding how to feel about it. He'd learned to read her in the pause. That's what you wanted, she said. It is. Then that's good. She said it without hesitation, and he believed that she meant it. The schedule changes in 3 weeks, he said. I know. You just told me. I'm telling you again because I want to be clear that I'm not disappearing. He held her eyes. I'm telling you because the stop is going to change, but the reason I've been at this stop every night hasn't. The rain worked its noise around them. She took a slow breath. Arden. Yeah. I've been saving for the barbershop for 2 years. I have 8 months left. When I open it, I'm going to be working harder than I've ever worked, and I'll have less time than I have now. I know, and I'm not going to apologize for that. I'm not asking you to. I'm just telling you the same thing you just told me. She adjusted the backpack strap, the one that had been fixed with gaffer tape for weeks, still holding. That I'm not disappearing either. The reason I've been at this stop every night, that doesn't change either. He was quiet for a moment. Then, You're saying we're both saying the same thing. I'm saying we're both saying the same thing in the least efficient way possible, she said. Something moved in his face. And then he did something she hadn't seen before. He laughed. Not a polished laugh, not a social one. The real kind. Low and quick and genuine. She felt it in her chest. The bus came. They were mid-sentence, or past words entirely, standing in the rain with the city moving around them, and the bus door opened, and neither of them moved. People got on. The driver waited the standard few seconds. Then the door closed and the bus pulled away. They stood there a moment longer. The rain had slackened slightly. The reflective tape on her backpack caught the streetlight, and for a second the two of them existed in a specific kind of clarity, the kind that only arrives after something has been said that couldn't be unsaid. And it turns out to be simpler than all the silence that preceded it. "I'm going to be late," she said. "Me too." Neither of them moved. The schedule changed 3 weeks later, as promised. Arden reported for his first official day at the Hollow on a Monday. He walked the venue's back corridor and checked the cable inventory and ran a full test of the system, and at 6:45 in the evening, the time he would have been at the bus stop, he was under the stage accessing a junction box. He had Ayana's number now. Had had it for 2 weeks. They texted occasionally, not often, nothing performative. She'd sent him a photo of the updated barbershop notebook page once, just the numbers, and written, 6 months. He'd sent back, "I know." She'd replied, "You don't know what that means yet." And he'd written, "Then tell me when it happens." The gaffer tape on her backpack strap was starting to show its age, which meant it had been there for close to 3 months. The permanent position steadied things. Tomas adjusted, as he always did, and the morning slots went to someone else. And the work was good, clean and continuous, the kind Arden had spent years building toward. He did it with the same consistency he did everything. No announcement, just delivery. On a Thursday evening in the 5th week of the new schedule, Ayana's phone buzzed while she was closing the barbershop. A message from a contact she hadn't seen in 2 years, the owner of the building where she'd been looking at the empty space on Delmont. The lease was opening up, first right of refusal, if she could confirm within a week. She stood in the empty barbershop after Deja had left and held the phone and did the math she'd been doing for 2 years. And the numbers had a different quality now. They were close. Close enough to take the meeting. She called Mr. Mario. He answered on the second ring. "The Delmont space opened up," she said. "A moment. When do you meet them?" "I haven't agreed to meet yet." "When do you meet them?" he said again, patiently. She laughed. "Tuesday." "Good," he said. "Wear the gray jacket. You look like what you are when you wear the gray jacket." She called Arden next. It was late, past 10, and she half expected voicemail. He answered. She could hear the echo of the empty venue behind him, the ambient sound of a large room with the lights down. "The space on Delmont," she said. "It's available." He was quiet for a second. In that second, she could hear him processing it, not calculating a response, but placing the information properly. 6 months, he said. "Less if the meeting goes well and I move the timeline." "Do you want to move the timeline?" "I want to open my barber shop," she said. "I've wanted that longer than I've wanted anything else." "Then move the timeline." She exhaled. "I have a meeting Tuesday." "I know." A pause. "I'll be in the back when you open it." She stood in the empty shop. The single lamp over her station was still on, throwing that specific warm light she'd come to associate with the end of days here, the space that had taught her what she needed to know and held her while she built toward more. "Why the back?" she asked. "Because that's where you can see everything. The whole room, the work, what you built." He said it plainly. "I want to see you work. All of it." She thought of Mr. Mario's question, weeks ago. "Have you ever let anyone see you really work?" She thought of the answer she'd given. No. and what it had cost her to give it. "Okay," she said. "The back." The grand opening was on a Saturday in late November. The space on Delmont had 3 chairs, one of them hers, 2 for the people she hired, including Deja, who had given her 2 weeks' notice at Carter's 2 days after Ayana signed the lease, without being asked. "You signed the lease and didn't call me first?" Deja had said, standing in the doorway of the new space with her arms crossed. "I'm insulted." Then she'd walked in and looked around and said, "Okay, I'm not insulted. I'm employed." The floor was dark wood, the lighting warm, and under the main chair there was a small strip of gaffer tape that no one would ever notice. Only Ayana knew why it was there. The name on the glass was what she'd told Arden on the night they missed the first bus together. He'd heard it before anyone else. It felt right that way. The morning clients came and went, and it was one of those rare days when the work itself was the event. Every chair occupied, Deja moving through the space like she'd been born to it. The neighborhood coming in and sitting down and looking in the mirror and seeing themselves. Mr. Mario arrived at 11, same as always, except this wasn't Carter's, and this was not routine. He sat in her chair, and she wrapped the cape and picked up her comb, and he looked at her in the mirror with the expression of someone who had been waiting a long time to see something happen. "You have the hands of an owner," he said. She paused. "You said that years ago." "I know." He held her eyes in the mirror. "I needed to say it twice." She did the best trim of his life that day. He tipped more than was reasonable. He shook her hand on the way out, which was the thing he did when words weren't sufficient. Arden arrived at 3 in the afternoon, when the morning rush had settled into the steady midday rhythm. He came through the door and looked around the space with the specific attention of someone who installs environments for a living, reading the acoustics, the light placement, the flow of the room. And then he walked to the back wall and stood there. She was in the middle of a cut. She looked up once, found him, and held his gaze for 2 seconds. He nodded. She went back to the cut. He stayed for 2 hours, watching her work. Not hovering, not announcing himself to anyone. Just present the way he'd always been. Consistently, quietly, with the full weight of attention that didn't need to announce itself. When her last client left, she walked to where he was standing. "So," she said. "You're good," he said. "I know. I mean," he paused. Something moved in his face. That quality she'd been watching shift since the night with the gaffer tape, the door that had been opening incrementally. "I mean, I know you know. I wanted to see it. There's a difference." She looked at him for a long moment. "The bus stop," she said. "I think about what it looked like from the outside. 2 people waiting for the bus," he said. 2 people waiting for the bus, she agreed, for months. Until one strap gave way. She tilted her head slightly. Or until one of us was already carrying the right materials. He reached into his jacket pocket. She almost laughed, even now. But what he pulled out was not tape. It was a small piece of reflective tape, folded flat, the kind from a stage supply pack. He set it in her palm. "For the business card," he said. "Deja told me you were thinking about a logo detail, a line." She looked at it. The reflective tape she'd had on her backpack for months was almost worn through. She'd been thinking about the logo for 2 weeks. A simple design, clean, with a thin element that caught light differently depending on the angle. Something that only made full sense once you knew what it came from. She closed her fingers around it. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. His mouth pulled at one corner. "Different stop now." "I know." She looked at him. "Different stop. Same time." She walked him out. The neighborhood was doing its evening thing. The record shop on the corner with its lights still on. The cafe 2 doors down starting to close. The street running its ordinary noise in all directions. At the door, she paused and turned the sign from open to closed. Through the glass, the warm light of the shop reflected back at her. Her chair. Her station. Her name on the door. Next to her, Arden looked at the street with the quiet patience she had learned to read as its own language. She had spent 2 years building something that asked for everything. He had spent the same time working towards something that required the same. Neither of them had given up the thing they'd been moving toward, and neither of them had asked the other to. What they'd built in the space between 2 bus schedules was smaller than a plan and larger than a habit. It was the specific, hard-earned thing that gets built between 2 people who both know the price of what they carry and choose, without ceremony, to show up in the same place anyway. The reflective tape sat in her palm, warm from his pocket. She put it in her own. This is what happens when someone really sees you and decides to come back tomorrow. If this story reached you, share it with someone who deserves to know this kind of love exists.